All right, so we're here. It's Saturday night. You and I are out dancing, and we took a break, right?
Yeah, we just did a nice dance, and I was instructed that I was giving up too much of my screen, so I had to go horizontal. And besides,
this is my
and
closest girlfriend here, and her name is Kiddo.
pedal,
Kiddo, and she is
kiddo.
wire-haired pointing griffon. She is so cute, aren't you, Kiddo? Huh? You're so cute. All right.
I got Piglet in the background here. We should see if they like each other.
She was the mother of the puppies that I showed a few weeks ago. So
Excellent. All right, so we just went through our whole long harangue, and our mutual agreement was it was way too technical, way too detailed, and there is no easy fix, so we're going to hold off on that.
no, nobody but the two of us care about it. So that's probably a good place to leave it.
So instead, we'll say, welcome, campers. It's Saturday night. Can you hear me, or do I sound like I'm in the bottom of a bathtub?
Yeah, welcome, campers.
Well, that was so loud. I just heard that come through your mic.
Later in the day, my vocal cords tighten up. It's hard for me to get down there, so I just have to wing it. That's it.
You see, now you sound like I did last time. All right, so you did an upload, and we were chatting before, plotting our discussion. You were talking about the Sumerians. Wow. You did an upload. Were the Sumerians involved?
Yeah, well, what I was talking about was, because over the last couple of days, I've talked about red pilling back, right?
Yes.
Red pilling into the past. And
Right.
if people talk about red pilling, typically they talk about H.W. Bush is about as far back as they go. And one of the comments I made is, even if you assume that you take him back to 1981 when he became vice president, you're still only talking 36 years and then the last year and a half of Trump. So
Yeah, I saw that. That was a great scene. Everybody has to watch that. That was a brilliant video. You dropped it all the way back to Alexander Hamilton, who was in fact an agent for who? The Rothschilds.
Well,
Yes.
the Rothschilds, but
The Rothschilds. You have to say that with that stuffy British accent.
He was supporting the central bank when we formed the United States, and
Right.
we, against Jefferson's better interest, we agreed to a central bank, and we agreed to let the private bankers be our central bank. And of course, part of the problem was that we owed them money. That we owed them money, and as a part of getting free from George III, we had to honor all of the debt that we owed to the Rothschilds as part of the end of the war with George III. So they kept their fingers in it right from the start. And Hamilton said, well, gee, a little bit of debt's good for us as a citizenry. Let's let them build up some debt on us.
There you go. What a concept.
Yeah.
Just like after the Federal Reserve in 1913. Let's build up a weight. Then they put in the IRS to collect from the citizens in the form of taxes to pay back the debt to the private bank, in case anybody missed that. And then, of course, they magically jumped into a world war, which jacked that debt up big time, because a little debt is good for you.
So we had Andrew Jackson that they tried to kill a couple times, and they actually had a guy that tried to shoot him twice, and both shells didn't go off. And Jackson hated the bankers and managed to get rid of them. To our great benefit in 1833 or 34 or whatever it was.
Somewhere, maybe even 35. But his greatest claim to fame, his legacy, when interviewed after he was out of office, he said, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And he said that I killed the bank. Right?
Exactly.
And I did a show on this, and we talked about the fact that Trump has Andrew Jackson's portrait in the White House.
Yes.
What's fascinating is MSM comes out and says, oh, he's a racist because Jackson was rough on the Native Americans and slaves and blah, blah, blah. But they completely missed the point of he destroyed the central bank. He moved all the money out and had no debt. First time in history. Imagine that.
Anything I would hope for about Trump is that we would knock the Federal Reserve down. And of course, anybody that has watched me knows that I stuck my little neck out and said, look, the Fed, and tried to get 100,000 people to say so. But it's neither here nor there. If we're going to gain, we're going to gain. So we'll see. So let's go back to the Sumerian thing, because this is part of the red pilling. And
yeah, but hold on. Before we do that, or should we do the Nazi thing? We want to, because we had the two topics.
let's do the Sumerian thing, and then we'll do the Nazi thing. So we'll go up and back on history. The Sumerian thing takes us back about 2,500 BC. Okay.
This is good. I'm going to listen because I haven't seen this show, so I'm going to smoke. Don't mind me. This is tough, by the way, because I'm holding this stupid camera in my left hand horizontally, and now the lens is here. Normally, I do this, and I can hold it in my right hand, and now do that. But now I'm giving up valuable real estate. So we'll come back. We'll hold the camera lefty, and I'll smoke righty. All right.
I love it when you do cartwheels, so that's good. So here's
thank you.
My comment about the Sumerians is that they found clay tablets. They started to find clay tablets about 150 years ago, and they couldn't translate them at first, and then they eventually figured out that if they backed up through the Semitic language and the Babylonians and the Akkadians and the rest of that, that they could break that down and figure out what those guys were saying. And what they ended up finding out was that the history, ancient history, was being recorded on clay tablets, and we can tell two things about it. One is the clay tablets cannot be altered. You can't take
can't edit them.
You can't take a 5,000-year-old clay tablet that's been fired and go, I'm going to change this. And the second thing is you can age date it because you can tell roughly how old it is.
Right.
So eventually, I think they found 1.5 million of these clay tablets. So there are libraries with clay tablets.
Wow. I had no idea. Are you kidding? Oh, 1.5 million of these clay tablets? Holy cow.
And so.
Where were they found, man?
Well, they're found in the Mesopotamian area, all through where, the great Tigris-Euphrates area. And of course, they're
also known as Iraq.
Yes, also known as in modern days as Iraq. And of course.
All right, so I'm going to throw this in and I'm going to shut up.
Okay.
Is it arguable that the psychopaths in power today did this vicious attack in Iraq to destroy the historical facts so they can rewrite history?
And what the first thing that happened when we took Baghdad?
Oh yeah, the antiquities were looted.
They raided the antiquities, yes, and many of them were not ever found. And of course, what we said as a government is that we were going to protect those antiquities, and I think something like 10,000 of them disappeared. Now they brought a bunch of them back, but what did they take away, and what did we lose by way of access to others? But beyond that, so here's the deal: the Sumerians saved stuff for contracts and for a disposition of agreements and water rights and irrigation and all kinds of things. They saved stuff for school. They saved stuff for personal and family discipline. They saved stuff about their Congress and about how they ruled and what the laws were.
The 1.5 million tablets, there's a whole history of their existence. That's outstanding.
And they also saved their history, and this is the part that I related in the video today, is that there is a deluge story in the Sumerian tablets, which has to do with the Noah's Ark story.
The Great Flood.
Came about.
Yeah. Okay.
And there is an Garden of Eden story and the creation of Adama or Adam or Adam as we know him.
Right. An Italian Adamo. Right.
So what I attempted to do was to say, yes, we have the Hebraic tradition in the Old Testament, but if you look at the stories are Sumerian stories, and what is the same and what has been changed. And so that's part of the red pilling.
I love it. I can't wait to watch the show, man. So I'm getting the author's cliff notes right here. Very special. Thank you, sir.
Well, and it's a cliff notes of cliff notes, because there's a guy named Kramer that was a huge translator, and of course Zechariah Sitchin has been a translator since then. And if you've read that stuff, you get all kinds of stuff. And Sitchin's pretty far out there. Seething actually treats these people, these lords that were the overseers of the Adam and the creator of the Adam, who supposedly genetically modified humanoids to create humankind as their overlords, and that those same overlords and some of the things that the same overlords said and did show up in the Hebraic Old Testament.
Okay, and we need to stop and rewind that, because you lost me at the Adam. Now, is that the same Adam in the garden, arguably?
Yeah.
Okay, now who did what, and did genetic modification on that was written where?
The Sumerians claim that they, as a people, come from Adam, and Adam was the Adam of their past.
Okay.
And that person was a genetically modified hybrid of humanoids that were on the planet at the time, and their lords. And that their
lords, meaning the Sumerians' lords.
Yeah, the Sumerians.
The humanoids were the lords, and Adam was like the merge. He was the hybrid. Is that what you're saying?
He was
okay.
Precursor to the humankind. And
all right.
Is it a story that's 10,000 years old or 200,000 years old?
It doesn't matter. I just wanted to get the sequence here.
So all right. So let's
out of that becomes slaves. Who were the slaves?
Humankind.
Or the lords?
Humankind. No, the lords create, supposedly, according to Sumerian tablets, created us as humans to be their slaves. And we as humans tended the Garden of Eden, and we as humans were their subjects. We were their slaves and subjects. And what the surmise of guys like Sitchin are that getting the apple in the Garden of Eden was coming into knowledge that we had the right to be something other than slaves, and that angered the Sumerian lords, and they actually kicked us out of the Garden of Eden and made us fend for ourselves. That it was
now, is this reported as like historical fact, or is this like religious myth in their world?
Well, no, they report that as their history.
Okay.
But obviously it's ancient history, and obviously we are today doing translations of these tablets, and of course it's highly interpretive translations. My point was that part of the red pilling is to recognize that we as a species have been here for tens of thousands of years, and that our historical stories that we have been teaching each other may not be accurate. And that goes
there you go
6,000 years. And I'm not saying they are or are not, and I'm not saying
right. I understand. You're not saying it's true or false. You're just saying this is what's reported.
Right, and that this is another historical source, and that it is worthy of, at least of discernment and consideration. So.
Wow. Well, let me ask you now on this. You're saying this is when 3,500 years ago, or 3,500 BC?
I think it's 3,500 to 25, or 4,500 to 2,500 BC. They preceded the Babylonians. Okay?
How about the Egyptians? Where are the Egyptians in the timeline?
They preceded at least the Egyptians that we know. Now,
okay.
There are other historical references now, and there are no recognized archaeologists that would say that, but that are saying now that both the Sphinx and the pyramids predate the Egyptian culture in any fashion at all, so that they may be 10 or 12 or 15 or 20,000 years old, and of another culture that's older than anything Egyptian.
Well, I don't know. I heard about the extended age on the Sphinx in particular based on the deterioration of I was going to say the metal of the stone, which was rain. It was water damage. And as such, the only time they calculate that could have been is another 12,000 years earlier, when that scene was very tropical and it wasn't desert. So that means you had civilization there, and someone built that and put it up. Now, I didn't hear that it wasn't the Egyptians. It could have been the Egyptians who were going back that far, no?
Yeah, well, we don't know who did it, so it could have been a previous Egyptian culture. The fact is that there's no continuity.
Okay.
The current culture of Egyptians, which goes back to 2000 BC or something like that,
Right.
not linked to an older culture, which might have been the creator of the Sphinx and the pyramids. But you know what's obvious to me, and if you have pounded on a rock, okay,
Right.
if you've ever pounded on a rock, and you are chiseling and sculpting on a rock,
Right.
and you're going to either take sandstone or basalt or granite, which the granite is part of what's lined in the Gaza large pyramid, the biggest pyramid. You know, you've
Okay.
got an inner chamber that's granite, right? And it's
Sure.
12 or 15 feet tall in that main chamber. I had a guy that is a PhD, I think geologist, who took his metering devices into that.
Okay. Yeah.
And that wall, according to him, is 5/10,000ths accurate.
That's pretty tight.
It's a little bit hard to get a 4 by 8 foot piece of granite accurate to within 5/10,000ths of an inch, much less a whole wall of granite.
Yeah. That's
And
exceptional.
we're
Right.
talking
And
about the width of a hair or two, and we're talking about 5,000 years later, and we're talking about a very hard substance that has been smoothed to within a few thousandths.
1,000th. Yeah. That's like crazy tight. That's like milling, engine parts today. Right. On metal.
This is a half a thousand. It's 5/10,000.
Yeah. I understand. It's like, perfect. Wow. That's pretty impressive.
I thought.
But I wanted to jump back to now the lineage continuing down and the potential distortion of the history.
So all of our major Western religions,
Yes.
which is Jewish and Christian and Muslim, come from one source, which is Abraham, right?
Right.
Abraham was born in the town of Ur,
Okay.
in the southern part of the Mesopotamian area, and was raised, I think, there before he headed west. Okay.
Okay.
So it would be not surprising at all that he would know about the Sumerian legends and that he would bring them with him.
Okay. Reasonable.
Yeah. So the story because the story of the deluge is exactly the same story.
Good argument.
It is a family benefited by God or a Lord, given the parameters of an ark, told to save seed and everything else, and put it in the ark, and also told when the flood was going to come. And according to the Sumerians, and according to Sitchin, the way that Noah knew that the flood was coming was that all of the lords hopped into a spaceship, and when he heard the roaring of the spaceship to head out, because they were getting the hell out of there when the flood came, he knew to all climb into the vessel and get everybody settled because the deluge was coming.
And whose story is that?
That's Noah.
No, Sechin, you said?
Yeah, Zechariah Sitchin is a translator of the Sumerian tablets, and so
And the Sumerians say that?
Yeah,
that's interesting. Okay, well, I don't want to dive into the whole UFO thing. So let's go to the distortion of the modification of these stories, shall we say, of the record. Because wasn't Abraham, that was done verbally, or was that written?
Did you just lose? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, no, I just hit 20% because of our first little dance. I'm losing battery here. I'm not plugged in, so we can't go too long. But
all right, obviously the Genesis story and the Noah part of the story is in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament, and the Sumerians are in clay tablets. And the deluge is a very similar story. The difference is, and this is part of what you see in the distortions, that I'm just playing with numbers off the top of my head, but as I recall, the Sumerians, the flood lasted 6 days.
Okay.
With the Old Testament, it was 40 days. With the Sumerians, it took 6 or 8 weeks or something like that for the water to recede enough for them to get out and begin to recover. And I think in the Hebraic, in the Old Testament, it's something like 10 or 11 months. And so the parameters of the story have changed,
Yeah.
Person who was the Lord has changed, but the names of the people and the family and what's saved in the ark and the actual deluge are all the same.
Okay.
And as you well know, the deluge story is not peculiar to the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Babylonians, the Egyptians and the rest of that. It goes into Mayan culture, Incan culture, East Asian culture. That deluge covered the world.
Okay.
And virtually
So that's a good reason to jump out on a flying saucer and split.
Get the hell out of here.
Yeah, big flood. Big flood. Wow. All right. So that is your provocative presentation on your earlier video. Is that the thumbnail cliff note from the author? Or is there more? Because there was more that we were talking about.
Well, we talked about things, but let's switch to the Nazi thing, which I think is a really interesting part of it and something you brought up and something you brought to me. And let's give first credit to
Amazing Polly.
Polly. Okay, so
yeah, she is amazing.
for anybody who hasn't seen her, she is a very conscientious, thoughtful, and investigative person who brought us a bunch of undisclosed documents, formerly secret documents that have been released, classified documents. And
I'm going to return back to my charging phone so we can continue this. So I'm switching to the concrete room. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So, and what she basically said was, in the process of watching all these, is that it was obvious that we were playing with the German culture and that the German culture negotiated itself back into us. And of course, it takes back to the question of whether the Germans lost the war or not. I mean, certainly the Germans territorially lost the war, and certainly the German people as a people suffered greatly and were subjugated by the war. But did the Reich survive?
Right.
Part of the comment. And of course, it fits in with the whole paperclip stuff, which was my minor addition to it, which is a book about the paperclips and the 21 people who were most prominent in the lady's book, and the people that were paperclipped, like Werner von Braun and others, who came here and got free passes into this country and got free passes out of the Nuremberg trials too.
Right. Let me add to that. And what Polly did is she found a declassified document that was 472 pages long from the CIA, and it was all about Operation Rusty. And it was separate and distinct from paperclip. And what this was talking about was introducing, among other things, the German, we'll say the high command, into the United States. And whether it be by way of Argentina, Brazil, or directly in. And what she covers in this, which is impressive, she ties it in from the SES, the Senior Executive Service, possibly, and does it from the Q disclosure, where Q is talking about what is it, the keystone. And that intrigued her, and she was running this down and found a couple of fascinating documents in there talking about the end of the war, where, well, you watched the video, right? And what she said was that the Nazis approached the Americans, or the Americans approached the Nazis, which were enemies, right? And the Nazis said, well, we'll be spies for you against the Russians. And that was a fascinating concept because the Russians were our allies. And in this document where they're laying out their scope and the parameters of their duties and obligations, I guess, it comes out that they kind of prognosticate, if not blueprint, a world plan, kind of a globalist plan, which is what you had started to say earlier, that did the Nazis lose? And was this war all about the globalists winning? And it's a fascinating discussion because it speaks to creating Russia, or the USSR at that time, as one pole, the other pole being the United States. So one side would be the bad guys, the other side is the good guys, that dichotomy of black and white. And then that the US would be, like the strong uncle on the planet and take care of everybody, be the global policeman.
Well,
and the Russians would be the bad guys.
And
Right?
that's the pitch they would make to us. But we also have to recognize that at that same time, there were Germans going over to the east side, including some of the people that were paperclipped. But let's go
Right.
back. Let's go back.
Well, and then there's another thing that says that we had
Let's go.
the Germans that were spying for us against the Russians were also sharing the information from us with the Russians. So they were double agent spies. Right. So it's like beautiful.
Well, the other thing
Well,
that you have to put into this, and I'm not sure she did this or not, but it has to do with the CIA, which is at the core of this.
right.
And the CIA was formed during Truman, and we've got skull and bones guys that start the CIA. You've got the Dulles brothers that were working with the Germans on both sides. You've got Prescott Bush, that is a skull and bones guy that was also working both sides, and that actually had his Union Bank shut down in 42, if I recall correctly, because it was collaborating with the Germans and providing them finances. And
Right.
then you've got,
And or money laundering for them, right?
and
Yeah.
so you've got the CIA, and what Truman didn't know what the hell he was doing. Eisenhower figured out sometime during his term that the CIA had gone rogue, and that's his military industrial complex thing. I think was not so much military industrial as it was that this whole Nazi business and the whole Germanic thing and the multiple corporations, the multinational corporations, had taken over the surreptitious part of the United States government. And then you've got Kennedy, who attempted to shut them down and thought that he had control over them, and they took him out, and the CIA was definitely in on it. So who was the guy sitting at Dealey Plaza the day that Kennedy was shot? The guy that can't remember where he was when Kennedy was shot, and this guy was at the time 40 odd years old. So he's the only over 20-year-old person on the planet or in the United States that can't remember where he was. And who was that? He was
HW. Wasn't that HW?
H.W. Bush. And you say, well, gee, he has denied being in the CIA, and he even denied it in hearings when he became the director of the CIA, that he'd been in the CIA before then. But the two ships that worked in the Bay of Pigs were named Barbara and a name that matches his oil company. How does that one fit? And that he was in the area around Cuba with his oil exploration, and that there was reference with J. Edgar Hoover that there was a George Bush working for the CIA, and George, of course, said, well, there was another George Bush, it had nobody else but me. So,
right.
So you've got this German Nazi linkage with the Dulleses and the Bushes and J. Edgar Hoover and the rest of these guys and the CIA. So the rogue part of what you and I are pissed about is, what do they call it? The Rusty? What's the Rusty?
Yeah, it's Operation Rusty. Yeah.
So yeah, you got.
But wait, what this was the beginning of this, where it was a blueprint to infiltrate the American government and lay out the, what do I want to say, the bipolar, for lack of a better word, the dichotomy of good and evil, create the ongoing conflict, all right, of the good guys, the bad guys. So you have conflict, war, Cold War. And what do we talk about? Debt is good. And there you go. All right.
Well, and again, to go back to it, the Germans were telling the Russians, we'll come help you set up the empire here and expand. And then if you back up to Roosevelt, who capitulated in 43 and 44 in Yalta and in in Iran and elsewhere, and he was conceding 15 Eastern European countries to the Soviets, and
right.
It was all part of the capitulation move. So
right, and that's what she discovered. This document is laying this out. It's unbelievable. So it was like, what idiot general on the American side would agree to such a thing, to have your enemy become your spy and have this whole structured thing, other than it was a big plan on a globalist play.
Yeah,
and it's great. And that was coming from 1944, I believe. And then, of course, as you pointed out in that excellent piece you did a couple of weeks ago, I think, or a week, whatever, where you were talking about how Roosevelt gave up, well, what did you just say? He gave all of these countries off to communist USSR.
No question.
And
No
yeah,
question.
and then you've got the other discussion of the guy Wayne Jett, who's talking about the manipulation of the finances and the depression here, where it was caused in order to attempt to crush the will of the American people and push them into this communist mode where the government will take care of everything. So it becomes a communist world takeover, right? And the only thing not mentioned in this thing that Miss Polly talked about was China. And what's fascinating is towards the end of it, she said the whole document speaks to, she even mentioned the European Union, that was mentioned in 1944. It said Europe will become a union. And sure enough, what was that, 1992 that happened?
Yeah,
and now look at what's going on over there. Wow.
You got Wilson with the League of Nations. You got the United Nations. You also have, and this is something that Herbert Hoover pointed out in his book called, what is it, something rather Betrayed. And that is this. We half-sheeted Chiang Kai-shek and tipped the edge to Mao in the 40s during the war, and basically made it so that Chiang Kai-shek was not fully capable of responding. So we gave billions of dollars to the Soviets to defend themselves, and half-sheeted Chiang Kai-shek when he was trying to fight off the Japanese, and didn't ever worry about him, and let Mao take the north part and split up China.
Right.
And
so it was a big plan. And don't forget, China, they set up the United Nations, right? That was, 2.0 of the League of Nations, version 2.0. And in that, you had Russia, or the USSR, and you had the US, and mysteriously, China is on the Security Council. Interesting, isn't it?
Well, what FDR
So we're outnumbered 2-1, man.
What FDR said right from the start is he looked at the entire world being divided 4 ways. And
4 ways, okay.
On paper, he said the Brits were in because, of course, at the time he was working with Churchill, and that the Chinese would be in and the Russians would in, and it would get split out that way. But you also have to look at what he did about the empire, the British Empire, and what he wanted to do, what Roosevelt wanted to do, was dismantle the British Empire. He was all in favor of them giving up India and their Middle East stuff. And so effectively what Roosevelt, though he didn't tell Churchill this,
I was going to say, how did Churchill feel about this?
Well, they were playing each other off against each other, and they, to a certain extent, as I read it, they were playing off good old Joe, and Roosevelt thought he had the inside track with Joe. Churchill, in some fashion, figured that the empire that he had would be surviving. And Churchill, the one thing that Churchill didn't want to do, I mean, besides winning the war, is that he didn't want to dismantle the British Empire. And so what Roosevelt would say to him is, yeah, let's take care of it, Churchill. And then when he was working on the process, he was helping to dismantle the British Empire, because he really saw it in the 1984 version, Orwell's version, which basically was going to end up being China, the Soviet Union, and America. So we were going to have the American.
So that's Orwell's version. So it's a 3-way.
It's a 3.
Right? China,
yeah.
Russia, US. So where was the 4 part? Was the UK?
No, yeah, the UK was the 4th part, but Roosevelt worked to undermine Churchill.
Okay.
There's no other way around it. And if you look at the writings and the comments and the rest of that, Roosevelt was proactive about dismantling the British Empire. And did he do it? No, he didn't do it, but he was proactive about it. And if you look at what he did,
I don't know. I mean, did he or did he not? Because when did we have all those crazy boundaries or borders drawn in the Middle East with Iran, Iraq?
Well,
was that World War I or World War II?
The French and the British got to split up the Middle East, and so you've got Morocco and the rest of that going to the French, and you've got the Saudi areas and some of the rest of that went to the Brits, and then they pulled out of them. And you've got Southeast Asia, you've got the French in French Indochina,
Vietnam, and right.
So, but But let's go back to the core of what Polly was talking about, and that is that these Nazis, as you put, I think you've outlined what she said pretty well. And again, we're going to link to this. People see her stuff, but beyond
That's great.
Beyond that, what she said was that the Germans negotiated that if there was a question about whether they were pro-America or pro-German, that the German aspect of it took precedence. If I recall from what she said. So,
yeah, I mean, but that was in this crazy document.
Yeah.
And that's what already it's agreed to. So it's obviously a plan to benefit the other side. That's what's so curious.
And then you've got Admiral Byrd and the Antarctic thing. And I know.
Oh, stop, man. Stop.
Yeah,
That's where the flood and they fly away. We'll do that next time.
Yeah. Well, you've also got them in Argentina. And I've got a paperclip guy. I've got a personal paperclip story where they dislodged one of the paperclips in 51, 52. And
that's funny. They dislodged a paperclip.
Dislodged the paperclip that was supposedly a typhus specialist working in and out of the concentration camps, and a medical doctor and a 4-star general, German general, and they bailed him out of here in a matter of a few days. He went from.
They took him out of the U.S. and sent him overseas, right down in Argentina.
And he had testified at Nuremberg and the rest of that, and Elie Wiesel and some of the others were after him, and Truman couldn't take the heat, so Truman got him out of here. So,
right, not to mention the agency might feel that the whole Operation Paperclip would have gone sideways and been exposed.
That's what he was concerned about, is that once they peeled off the general, this former general,
right,
that the bloodletting would take a bunch of the other paperclips out. And
you think Truman was concerned about that, or was Dulles more concerned?
Truman was concerned about it because Truman was this was in his second term. It was in 50, 51, 52, somewhere in there. But he did not want to have a big communist or a big Nazi bloodletting in his term of office. He did not want to have a situation where it looked like he had let all kinds of Nazis into the country, and that he was soft on the Nazis.
Right. So then he was fully cognizant and aware of paperclip, or was that kind of an under the table kind of deal by the agency?
If there was any doubt about what Truman did or did not know, this case, the one I'm talking about,
proved it.
Really indicates that the administration, and I'm sure all the way to Truman, knew exactly what was going on. They knew that they had vulnerability about the paperclip issue, about bringing Nazis in, which with Rusty or paperclip, whichever one you want to deal with. Knew that they were playing with fire, and they
interesting
had to hide it from the American citizen.
Amazing. Yeah, and I guess that's what they called the brain drain, right? Where they were pulling all the genius scientists there to make it look like, oh, it's benefiting America.
Well, they're also pulling the dark folks. They're pulling the military folks. They're pulling the German warfare guys. They're pulling the counter-espionage. They're pulling the computer guys. Yeah.
They're pulling the MK Ultra guys. Yeah.
And the secret space program and the rest of it.
That's right. That's right.
I don't want to talk about, but that's right.
Well, look, we got to keep an eye on the clock here, don't we?
I think we probably ought to shut this down.
We're at 44, so we're good.
Yeah.
But don't forget, well, I forgot what I was going to say here because I'm getting like lightheaded. What the hell? We were just talking about the Truman. But this other thing that Amazing Polly discloses is this Operation Rusty, which is separate and distinct from Paperclip. It's not the same.
But it is.
It's not the same.
It's a very parallel process.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's part of the same plan to infiltrate.
Right, and surreptitious and financed. And I think probably the big deal about Rusty, whereas we had the science and espionage and the biological warfare on the paperclip side, the Rusty side was the CIA bunch. And when you toss that in with our dark guys that 10 years later, 12 years later, were bumping off Kennedy, you've got Prescott Bush, the Dulleses, you've got J. Edgar Hoover, you've got the rest of those guys that were all playing games, the Skull and Bones guys that were all playing games, and wanted those guys in as counter-espionage stuff.
Right, and without even going that deep, I'm just looking at the big picture because there's major web of connectivity here. And, you know, Task Force had mentioned the discussion that she had with her old friend who was about 80, who was raised in Nazi Germany. She was a little girl there, and discussed growing up in Hitler's inner circle because her father was a very inner circle guy. And this woman had explained to Task Force, Jenny Moore, how that, you know, the whole concept of the Nazi infiltration into America, where it's the intent to become the Fourth Reich. And I think reading this thing that Polly found is great, and it shows the intent there. This paperclip thing shows the intent there. The hiding of the Nazis that you had indicated, the guy was shipped down to Argentina. And then you look at what's happening today, where you've got Mueller and the behavior patterns and the erosion of our constitutional rights, the stormtrooping activities of kicking down doors of Manafort, kicking down doors and seizing documents of the president's attorney, right? Laptops, and you're hitting his office, his house, and his hotel. These are really stormtroop tactics. Having a private document from Rosenstein to Mueller, engaging him in the version of special counsel without us ever knowing what the terms of the commission agreement are. What the hell is that?
Well,
right?
You've got the Patriot Act, the Freedom Act, and who passed that? Who got that in?
Oh, that would be Shrub.
Yeah, that would be the next Skull and Bones generation.
All right.
And basically, what they did is they Nazified America.
Yeah, and they're surveilling us for our own benefit.
They were surveilling us before, but this just gave them license to disavow our constitutional rights. I mean, when you can pick somebody up and hold them without trial, without habeas corpus, without an attorney, without the right to post bond, without
a phone call to counsel, nothing. You've been disappeared like a Saddam Hussein or a KGB. You're out. You've been blacked out.
Your accusers or anything else. You know, all the constitutional rights are passed.
Right.
And they haven't done it wholesale. That is to tens of thousands of us. But we have political prisoners in the United States.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, it did it before that. You know, you had Ezra Pound, right?
Yeah. No, Ezra Pound. There's unquestionably Ezra Pound was a political prisoner. So. All right.
And for people who don't know, the mentor of Eustace Mullins, right? That was kind of the intro. Okay. Well, good chat, Dr. Phrog. All right. Hopefully we have better audio this time, and hopefully I wasn't too hyperactive and I didn't gross everybody out with smoking.
You know,
I have to have dinner, man. We have a 3-hour time shift here. So it's like 10:15. No wonder I'm getting spacey.
And I have to go cook dinner. So off we go. So
all right. Same here. Got to make it happen.
And again, a call out to Amazing Polly and our thanks to her for having brought this information to us.
Right. And I guess you're going to put this on your channel and I'll link over to it. Excellent.
Sounds good.
All right. So you're going to hit pause on that and let's chat for a sec after we're done, can we?